Start streaming. We are now live from downtown Mill Bay. Sure. But you'll need to get the notes from the live stream. We won't go over everything from last day. Or from another person in class. Yo. Yeah, go and grab. Anybody who wasn't here last day, make sure they get the handout. The handout has this on the upper right-hand side. A chunk, you'll see, because we'll go through it right now. Also, you diligently went on the live stream to double check, right?
I didn't see anything on the Google Class.
Oh no, it's always the live stream does. I don't put the link to the live streams on the Google Classroom, not the individual days. Okay. Last day, the day before last day, we did the structure of DNA, and we made a little candy version of this, which you combine them together. Sugar phosphate backbone combined with a code in the middle that is the nitrogenous bases. The order of that code we're going to see is actually what determines proteins and protein function. Then we started looking at where DNA is actually living and how it's packed in. We have to get 2 meters of DNA in every single human cell. Our chromosomes our DNA is divided into chunks, 23 pairs of chunks, and all the genes that make you up is on those 23 pairs. All of the chunks in the pairs are identical in terms of the types of genes they carry. Not identical in the code, because you get one from your mom and one from your dad, and obviously your dad's ones are better. And the last one down there, these are the only ones that are not the same. Those are known as the sex chromosomes. You have the larger one, which is X, and the smaller one, which is Y. Y is getting smaller, as in measurably smaller per generation. It is actively shrinking as we speak, and we don't really know why. You will see hysterical TikToks and Instagrams going, oh my God, males will go extinct in X number of thousand years at this rate. As far as we can tell genetically, it's shrunk before and then regrown, so who knows what will happen. Also, I thought I should mention, because you'll hear people online, particularly the older, say, this determines gender. If you're XX, you're absolutely female. If you're XY, you're absolutely male. About 30 years ago, so when they were in school, so they didn't know about it, they discovered one of the genes involved in gender expressions called the SRY gene. It's on the Y chromosome, and it determines whether or not you become male. It controls the enzymes and proteins that are secreted to signal the body to develop male genitalia, secondary male characteristics, pattern baldness. No, that's on the X, sorry. Testes, all those sorts of things. However, that gene can jump to the X. So there are people with that gene on the X chromosomes. They can have XX chromosomes. And can somebody grab the back door? They're very loud. You can have XX chromosomes and develop morphologically as a male because the gene just jumps. And genes do that. Genes from one chromosome, as part of an evolutionary process, will sometimes jump into another one. Sometimes that means it doesn't work anymore, and then that doesn't become a viable egg, as fertilized egg. But if it does work, then nothing bad happens. You just have that extra gene. Not only has it jumped to the X, it's also jumped to chromosome number 1. So now it's taken it right out of what we determine our gender expression gene. So if you have that, you will have more male tendencies. It can jump and then get deregulated based on what's around it. So it can jump, and then you have now 2 copies sometimes, because it may not jump, it may get copied and then jump. And then you'll end up with it being deregulated, because with more copies, your body will sometimes respond by deregulating these proteins because it has too much and then over deregulate. And since it's controlling a lot of gender expression, you can then have the entire gamut because it depends on where it is. So it's not just the X and Y chromosomes. That was discovered about 30 years ago. Up until that time, when people said they were different genders, we just had to like believe them. But for the people who didn't, this is an area of active research now. It's been really fascinating. It just happens. There are certain sequences of DNA in your chromosomes that make it more likely for a section to jump. We don't know why those exist. It might be that there is an evolutionary advantage for certain genes to move around or duplicate, or this might be accidental and like those are just made for another reason. But then in the DNA, a lot happens when it undergoes mitosis and meiosis, and it can get sticky and then copied and then flipped over or moved. On a similar but non-gender related note, for example, some of you may be lactose intolerant. That the fact that we are lactose tolerant, we meaning a large portion of humanity, is weird. Because normally what happens is that you have milk when you are an infant as a mammal, you get it from your mom, and then that gene shuts off because it is a waste of energy to produce enzymes to digest a food you will never eat again in your life. So your body just shuts it off. At some point, it's called the lactase gene. Whenever you hear something ending in ase, that means it's an enzyme. So lactase digests lactose. So you produce that enzyme, it's a protein expressed. You have probably about 20 to 30 copies of that gene. Most mammals don't have that many copies. At some point in evolutionary history, a form of it duplicated. The original form that shuts off still shuts off, but then another one turns on. And some people have them turning on and off. So you have multiple copies of this gene turning on, some will turn off. You could be lactose tolerant until you're 12, and then because it was it's a mutated copy somewhere, it just turns off. And now you're lactose intolerant. You don't produce that enzyme anymore. And then when you're 32, a different copy will turn on and you're not lactose intolerant anymore. You will have no idea because you'll have learned that by that time that milk gives you diarrhea and you'll have stopped eating it. But you could be tolerant to it. Cats, by the way, do not have a lactase gene that goes beyond kittenhood. So whenever you feed your cats milk, you are giving them diarrhea. They are lactose intolerant and their bodies can't handle it. Like most people with lactose intolerance, they still love ice cream and milk and they'll drink it anyway. Not good for them, don't feed them milk. So yeah, this process of gene duplication, if your genetic background comes from an area with a lot of cattle, we tend to find those people higher amounts of lactose tolerance because it was an important food source, particularly if other food sources weren't around. So different parts of the world have different ranges of how tolerant they are of lactose depending on how long they've had domesticated milk-producing cattle. But it's not for certain. Anybody can develop it. Any gene that you actively use, if you stop using it entirely, you can shut it off because your body goes, oh, I guess you're not using this anymore, and we'll stop making that enzyme. And then if you reintroduce it, you're intolerant. You might be able to slowly reintroduce it and get it to up its production levels, but also maybe not. So if you've they used to think, sorry, now this is going into Marcus, for a time, we were very worried about the food that we were feeding very young children because if you feed them something and they're anaphylactic, they die. So, and peanuts are the joke in biochemistry class is if someone comes into your house and points a gun into your head and says, the next guest that comes in, you have to feed them either a bowl of meth or a bowl of peanuts. Which one do you choose? And the answer is the bowl of meth because it's safer than peanuts. If they're anaphylactic, they die of peanuts. If they're not, the bowl of meth will just, give them an interesting time. And then hopefully they don't do it again. So they said, do not feed peanuts to very young children just in case they're anaphylactic, wait until they're older. What that did is it made sure that the genes required for digesting the protein in peanuts were never expressed because they never were exposed to it. So it actually increased the rate of anaphylaxis. So for all the children growing up in that generation, mine, a little bit younger than me, um, those children were given the advice: don't feed them stuff in North America. Different parts of the world, of course, they get peanut oil when they're incredibly young. We're not confronted with these, so their rates of allergies just skyrocketed. Now they say feed them all the foods very, very, very young. My sister-in-law, actually, when they had her first baby, she fed them peanut butter in the hospital parking lot because they were so freaked out of having heard stories that you could die from anaphylaxis. But at the same time, also told you have to expose it to them young. They just sat in the parking lot, fed them peanut butter, waiting for them to die. Now we're not quite that freaked out, but so if you know someone who decided to go gluten-free, gluten is the protein in bread. The things you're more likely to develop allergy to are proteins. So you would never really had a problem with gluten before, but you tried it as a diet and managed to go gluten free for a long time, like 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and then all of a sudden you eat it and you can't digest it anymore. Well, yeah, you shut off all the enzymes; they don't work anymore, and so you'd have to slowly introduce it. I have a relative who grew up completely vegetarian. Her entire family decided not to be vegetarian anymore, but she can't. Her body just never developed the enzymes to digest meat in that particular form, and every time she tries it, she just gets incredibly sick. She is vegetarian based on her enzyme production. The rest of her family didn't have that problem, but it just depends. It can be very individual. So these are controlling the expression of a lot of things. One of the words I've been using constantly is enzyme. Enzyme is the protein machine that does all the work in your body, makes all the reactions happen. So it's also the meat, obviously, it's the muscle. But protein, in addition to being the muscle, is also things like enzymes that do all the work. So we did that. We did this, looked how it was wounded in a coil, and then went through how we took this strand of 2 meters of DNA, put it around little tiny, I don't know, they almost look like Christmas ornaments, and then wound those into a structure, then wound those into a structure, and then wound that structure into a chromosome. By the way, someone mentioned something afterwards. This chromosome here is not a pair. That's a single chromosome. It's duplicated right before mitosis when it's going to get ripped apart. So if you see them like this, that is just a way of representing a single chromosome. Of course, when your body heals, you cut yourself, the cells have to duplicate. It has to duplicate all the DNA. It duplicates it like this and attaches them to the centromere, and then they rip them apart. So if they're attached, they're not these. Every one of these would have to duplicate before you heal. So if I was to draw it like that other one, all of these would look like this. And they all have a little attachment point called the centromere in there. So we were here. And just finished a long little introduction. Thousands of complex molecules called proteins, which perform all the important jobs inside the cell. I'm going to add some things. Maybe I'll turn to another page in here. DNA sequences of hundreds to thousands of base pairs that contain the instructions for making a protein are called a set of DNA that makes one protein. That's thousands of these. Chromosomes contain thousands of genes. I like mine blue. I'll make a couple of graphs here. Genes. G-E-N-E-S. Genes. Oh no, I when I was learning to become a teacher, the teacher's teacher, the teacher that taught me how to become a teacher, had me stand at the chalkboard, and I had to write sentences, which he said he always did with his student teachers who, had, because your writing is to be legible. He gave up after 2 months. He did try, though. He tried really hard. And I did too. So, but if you have trouble, put up your hand and I will do, the thing. And then I will say, look, even the computer can read it. What's wrong with you? Yes. The Praps? Oh, it says time on the bottom. Oh, like if I recognize it, it's not going to get there. So it says time on the bottom, energy on the left. And I just wanted to remind you, for example, if we had a reaction that looks like this, do you recall this from back when we did chemical reactions? Did anybody recall what this was? Yeah. I also realized if I'm going to do it here, I mean, you can write small, but I might as well take up a whole new page. There we go. Ha. The activation energy was the energy required to start a reaction. And for a lot of reactions, even if it's exothermic like this one is, that amount of energy is huge. And that reaction just wouldn't happen at body temperature, room temperature. It would just take so long to happen. This is what happens with no enzyme. If, however, you take an enzyme, now there are things that do this that aren't enzymes. In chemistry, we call them catalysts. So an enzyme is a type of catalyst. A lot of chemistry can be just finding the right catalyst to make a reaction go. Because a lot of reactions do have a high activation energy. They don't want to go. And if you can find a way to lower that, then industrially you can produce a lot of it, or make it go at all for producing a type of medicine. Enzymes have evolved to make reactions go with a very small amount of energy. They hold things in just the right place. Enzymes work by holding things in place and allowing the reaction to have just the right angle to approach. So it takes much less energy, as opposed to just waiting for the molecules to just bang together randomly until they finally react. And so that's what enzymes do. They just make all the reactions in your body go. Without them, you are a bit toast. Should we mention them this one? No, I think that comes up later. So this is chromosome 1. All the different genes we know on it. Let's see if I think I've got a Wikipedia link here. The Human Genome Project was just finishing when I was in university, in which they were sequencing all of the DNA, and then they announced that they had completed it a few years later. They actually didn't. They only completed it a few years ago, because there's a ton of areas in it that's not coded, like it doesn't do anything. And for a long time, they called that junk DNA. It literally didn't do anything, so who cares? Turns out a lot of that is involved in the regulation of genes, so it would turn it on and off, and we're still finding functions in there. And some of it seems to be truly junk. You have more viral DNA in your DNA than you have other types of DNA. You're made up of more virus than you are anything else. Because viruses go in, splice in, make more copies of themselves. But then when they leave, sometimes they leave bits of themselves behind. You use some of those genes, and other bits are just there as old remnants of your evolutionary past. So it's a chromosome is a weird flotsam and jetsam of all this sort of useful and not useful stuff. Sequencing it doesn't really tell you what's being expressed. So just seeing a gene doesn't really tell you what it does. So there's still a lot of work to do here. There is a ton of things. Most of these things, protein arginine methyltransferase, catalyzes the sequence transfer of a methyl group from one to side chains of another. You'll find most of these genes just do little tiny chemical reactions. And this is why we can say that you are something like 52% related to a corn plant. Most of the genes required for things are things required for all things. You need to be able to process oxygen, and you need to be able to move chemicals around your body, which every living thing needs to do. And those genes have been working since your primordial ancestor was the same in both corn plants and you. And so a lot of those haven't changed a whole heck of a lot. The parts that they have changed are parts that don't matter. It still allows it to function. By tracking those changes, they tend to occur statistically at a regular interval. We can see from that, just use that as a clock and see when the last time you had a common ancestor was, say, a corn plant. Do a bit more of that probably when we get into evolution. Here?
Yeah.
Yep. And when they were discovering, one of the first thoughts they had, of course, the more genes you had, the more superior an organism you are. So, of course, rice is the most superior organism. Human DNA contains about 20,000 genes. That changes every couple of years. 5 years ago, it would have said 27,000, but as they sequence more, they keep going, oh, those aren't actually genes. There's far less in us than we thought to actually make us. Oh, here we are, 20,500 I put down. Changed from 27,000 a few years ago. A tiny little bacterium may have as few as 180. It is true that the more you have, the more proteins you need to work with. But like mice are beating us. Rice are beating us. I think the one with the most number of genes might be a type of fungus. There are some incredibly complex genes. Or is it an onion? That has also changed as we sequence both the plant and animal kingdom. They're onion at one point. Organism with the most genes. Oh. No, this is too old. 2011? Forget it. 2021. It's changed. It's now the Australian lungfish, which is cool. It was a little tiny fly in 2011, which I just looked up. I think one time we thought the onion held it. It keeps changing. You can have lots of genes that don't do anything. Or you could just have a really complex biochemistry that's doing something really neat with energy Nothing to do with how intelligent you are necessarily or anything like that. How many does it say it has? 43 billion base pairs long, but that doesn't tell me the number of genes. You can just have really big genes. Oh, it doesn't say the number of genes. They're cheating. They're just saying since it's this long, it probably has this many genes. Oh, and it's not that thing anymore. That's an old record. Apparently, it's that a rare Japanese flower. Yeah.
That has the most genes?
Yeah. Well, I thought it said that, and now it's not telling me the number of genes. Now that's humans. 3 billion letters we are. It still didn't say the number of genes. I'm going to take away from this, they don't know yet. And they're just guessing. It's a bit like saying which author has written the most books and then counting the number of pages only. Now, if you write children's books, you might have written a lot more books than someone who writes fantasy fiction in which a single book is like that thick. Simply because they have to put in all the names of as they go to country and they invent an entirely new language. They've written 4 books, more pages than the person. So it's not always that easy, but that gives you a little bit of an idea. What? Oh yeah, how many chromosomes do we have? 46. Or, I always want to emphasize, 23 pairs. Now, every chromosome has the same genes. No, I'm gonna. It's the same gang. Yeah, no, the computer didn't understand me that time. And this is why you don't trust ChatGPT. Yeah. Oh, you absolutely shouldn't chat. All ChatGPT. It's a really good book on this. It was written quite a long time ago. I'll see if I can get a link. But it talks about this kind of thing, not with ChatGPT, but similar types of mechanisms. It was talking about politics. ChatGPT you absolutely should distrust because it is bullshit. But that's ChatGPT isn't lying to you. To lie, you have to have the intention to deceive, and it doesn't care. A liar is concerned with the truth. They may be actively hiding it, but they're still concerned with it. Yeah, but someone who's just feeding you BS, they don't care if it's true or not. When I've asked it to write an essay for me to see what kind of essays am I going to get from students to get a feel for it, about 90% of what it says is true, and about 10% is outright nonsense. But because it weaves it in and it is true BS, it doesn't care. It comes across as quite believable. That's almost worse. Not almost. It is worse. You really can't trust it.
So it gives you like bad, like gives you untrue facts.
Oh yeah, it just makes them up. But it's not lying because it doesn't know what the truth. It's just getting its information from elsewhere and just giving a statistical probability that one word will come after another word. It's just making stuff
I guess
up.
someone like doesn't AI just get its information from like the internet itself?
Yeah, that should.
Or, like everything's on it.
Everything's that, and it's not just getting its information on the internet; it's making guesses.
Yeah, okay.
So, like if I don't have a very large internet footprint. I deleted my Facebook years ago because, well, that was important for other people's mental health. I like to argue with people. Turns out you shouldn't argue with people that are family like that. Anyway, I asked it about someone who does have a large internet footprint. They're not super famous, but they're an author. I said, write me a biography. Wrote a great biography. It said that they lived in Toronto. They don't live in Toronto. They live in Vancouver. But it guessed based on one of the books that they wrote was about organizations that are in Toronto. It's clearly making those types of guesses. They're reasonable guesses, but it doesn't tell you that they're guesses. It's presented in the same way as facts. It's a very good BS artist.
Yeah.
They don't care. It doesn't care whether or not there is truth there. It just cares about the probability. In a way, yeah.
It's kind of funny because they're like I didn't even like know that much about it, but they're literally advertising everywhere. If I scroll on TikTok like 5 days, there'll be an ad about ChatGPT like this is the best AI creation since
a lot of it is open AI. Like a lot of it is open domain. So tons of people are now making other things with it. You can get it to do tasks for you in like Google Sheets, get an add-on, and it will do repetitive tasks for you. Microsoft has invested, I think, $10 billion in it. And the theory is that they're going to attach it to Bing because that's their only shot to overtake Google. Well, Google just gives you lists. And sorry, this is going to come a bit like in my day, but back in my day, if you type something in Google, the first 3 results were good. And now Google gives you like a selection of random stuff, it seems. And you have to really work to get good information out of it. But ChatGPT gives you stuff that feels good. Bing really needs something like that. Yeah. Same genes in the same position. So you get this gene from your mom, let's say. Oops. There. Your birth mom. Reminds me of the comedian thing who talks about his birth dad, and someone asked him, was your birth dad a good person? He says, if he was, probably wouldn't call him my birth dad. These genes are in the same position. You're asking how genes can switch. This is one of the reasons they can switch. Sometimes genes will cross over on chromosomes, so this gene will jump to, this is rare, but it's an important factor in evolution. So odds are this didn't happen in one of your cells, but let's say the gene for blue eyes is on one and the gene for brown eyes are another, and it's correlated with a host of other genes on the same chromosomes. They can actually mix and match. And then that it was on one particular gene, it's no longer. It's associated with one side of the family, but now it's not. So you can get that. They're in the exact same position. That makes the sequence the same, which means splicing across like that can occur. Now, they can have different sequences because, of course, one is sequencing for blue eyes, or another one is sequencing for brown eyes. By the way, just so you know, I may use eyes once in a while because it's such an easy example and everybody sees eye color. But eyes do not always correspond to simple Mendelian genetics. Mendelian meaning the Punnett squares that we're going to do. It is possible for 2 blue-eyed people, which is recessive, to have a brown-eyed child. It's not straight Mendelian genetics. There's a little bit more going on there. We probably won't get into that little bit more going on. We'll save that for university. but not everything corresponds to what we're going to be doing. We're going to do the very simple version. Chromosome pair with, I haven't defined alleles at all. Different versions of the same gene are called alleles. So brown eyes would be one allele, blue eyes would be another allele, gray eyes would be another allele. A-L. There we go. And what it looks like is known as a phenotype. I'm going to write it rather than, I'm going to print it.
So far, actually, it's actually read your hand.
There we go. Phenotype. What it looks like. So the allele is the gene, and the expression, how it comes out, is the phenotype. So this is a chromosome pair here with the same alleles. That could be, for example, for blue eyes. This one could be for brown eyes. And these are ones with different alleles. If these were eye color in the simple Mendelian model, then this one would have brown eyes, because if you have a dominant trait and a recessive trait, you only see the dominant. That is not always true. Sometimes you get blending, and we'll go through different types in which that. But the first one that they noticed was not the blending, but when one trait completely masks another trait. We're going to go all the way back to Gregor Mendel and his pea plants. So let's say I'm going to draw another one coming here. No, I drew that too close. There we go. Dad and mom. We'll use dad's is colored and noted because, of course, dad's genes are best genes. No, genes from your dad specifically. Because the genes don't belong to either person. They're like the temporary housing they're in until they get passed to the next generation. Now, individual A, we have blue eyes, brown eyes. If you have both of those copy, then this person is heterozygous. Yeah. And I realized at the end my brain went grrr. I don't know why I did that. Heterozygous means two copies of different genes. If you have two copies of the same gene, you are known as homozygous, or that particular pairing. It's not you in particular. You would have. There's nobody who would be homozygous for everything. That would actually be very bad. Homozygous one copy of an allele. I think I worded that badly. Two copies of different. I think I worded that one bad. Two copies of different genes. I'll give an example. So like B, there, that does it. One copy. Oh, that's the one that word. Not each. That makes it seem like more than one. One copy of an allele, an eel. I'm so invested by the guy who's keeping eels in his basement. Do you not know about Eel Man? Eel Man found a cistern, which is what houses used to have before city water, underneath his house. It was built a long time ago. So it's built for holding water. So he filled it with water. Yeah, and now he just keeps eels in the basement of his house. Yeah. No. City water comes in a pipe. Sorry? No. Very few houses do anymore. City water has been so reliable in Canada and North America that builders just stop making them. I'm going to rewrite that with this because I can hear the cries of pain. I'm going to say two copies of the same allele. There. I'm going to say that. Is this one okay? Yeah, each letter is a copy. So you personally will either have capital B, one from your mom. So this came from mom. And that came from dad. Now, not all genes work in a strict dominant recessive fashion, and more particularly, not all phenotypes. The expression is controlled by a single gene. So something like skin color is controlled, I think, by 27 different genes. Some of which, if you have the dominant one, your skin goes darker. But other ones, if you have the dominant one, your skin goes lighter. And so it has a very complex interplay. So you can get two people who are very, very light-skinned have a baby come out that is very, very dark-skinned, depending on what it got from either parent, and vice versa. When we had our children, we had one come out, and mom looked, based on mom's heritage, she said, that looks about right. And then the other one came out, and she was very shocked because it was way too pale. I was like, yes, those are my kids.
Wait, so I thought homozygous was one copy.
You always have two copies, one from your mom and one from your dad. But if you're homozygous, you have the same copy on both. What?
Having the same copy.
Because they just happen to both have the same copy.
Yeah, that happens. What are the chances on that?
Really high. For some genes, really high. If you have two people with brown eyes, it's very likely they both have the same copy of the gene. And there's lots of genes that are identical. Some genes, for example, you can imagine the gene that controls the enzyme that processes carbon dioxide to make sure that it dissolves in your blood. If that work goes wrong in any way, you die. That gene is what we call highly conserved. Everybody pretty much has the exact same copy. We're all homozygous for that gene. You get one from your mom and you get one from your dad, but it doesn't matter which one you get; they're both the same. If you get a different one, you don't get to live. Live. You don't get to live. No going on live anymore for you.
And then specific genes like affect different things. Like I know one affects Down syndrome.
Oh, that was mentioned last day. Let's see if I can look that one up. Because someone asked, it's been asked twice now. Pull that over. Here, where's... So how Down syndrome works is in the process of meiosis. Do you remember meiosis?
No. This is like the sperm and the egg, right?
Yeah. So all of your,
Similar when you get
all the way back here, when your cells duplicate, they have to recopy all these genes. But when you make sperm and egg, those are the back. When you make sperm and egg, these separate randomly. So you get a random assortment of only 23 chromosomes, not 23 pairs. Before they separate, they duplicate and then separate again. If you remember meiosis from last year, sometimes they don't separate properly, and one of them ends up with an extra copy. And I just had it out. For Down syndrome, it's an extra copy on chromosome 21. So it just means you have an extra chromosome, and because they're producing proteins, it affects how often those proteins do something. And if you're doing things at a faster rate than other areas, you won't develop in the same way as other development. And so your development, it just shoves development off a little bit. Yes?
What about like things other than Down syndrome?
Well, I have a little bit of familiarity in that one of my children, not that one, has a genetic condition. And so we had to undergo genetic counseling, which was just like, what are the odds that you would have another child with that? He has one of his enzymes on chromosome 1 just doesn't work. It's broken. If you're German, the odds of you having that is 1 in 20,000. So that's one allele. If you're not German, the odds of you having that is 1 in 80,000. So the odds of my having it, German background, Neufeld, was 1 in 20,000. The odds of Miss Hendley having it was 1 in 80,000. And then we have to actually meet. And then we have to have a child. And at that point, we're going to see later with Punnett squares, there's only a 1 in 4 chance because he has to get both alleles. If he gets a good copy from either one of us, because neither of us had this condition, so we're heterozygous for that. But he had to be homozygous for it. He'd get the same copy off of both of us. So that's 1 in 80,000 times 1 over 20,000 times 1 over 4. So the odds of him getting it is millions to 1. Should have bought a lottery ticket on that day. Yeah. So any gene that's broken can just be inherited. Now, if you're heterozygous for that, then you don't see it because you have a good copy. But it's just different populations have different gene frequencies. So, for example, if you're from the Philippines or Japan, certain in terms of your genetic background, you're more likely to be lactose intolerant. You have less lactase gene, on average, but not always. So it's just odds. As our populations are mixing, those are slowly going away. Yes, other question?
This is just a question, but does like this autism come from genetics or is it like something else?
It has autism in terms of what it's caused by has a long and really bad history of being blamed on mom. So if you develop, it used to be if you developed autism, you were like your mom didn't raise you right. She was like overly mean, and then for a while that was the theory was overly kind, like didn't toughen you up, so we should be meaner to children. The NDP did a proposal the other day to make spanking outlawed in BC entirely. Oh no, Mr. Patel has the legal right to spank you. Yeah. Oh yeah. No, we discussed this in class. Oh ho 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 ho. In order to be here as a boarding school, every single student, including the day students, have signed over as part of their opening documents in loco parentis to Mr. Patel, who, in his supreme Godhead authority, much like the Emperor of Mankind in Warhammer 40K, it flows from him to every house parent. And so I can spank any privet boy.
That's against school rules.
Hey, Jack.
That's against school rules.
But Mr. Patel could spank all of you.
That's against school rules.
I don't think we actually have a formal rule that says don't spanking kids.
Before, like when Brentwood was first founded, like kids were actually like
adults. Yeah.
But now it's like they
yeah, but we didn't make a rule saying you can't do it. We just stopped. We just removed the rule that said we have to do it.
Well, I still don't think that's allowed. Like I don't think that's.
Oh, I would agree that culturally we wouldn't do it.
Oh yeah.
But I would say right now there is no rule saying that he couldn't, and he is legally protected from doing so in the province of British Columbia. Now there is a whole bunch of rules. BC doesn't just say you can beat your children. There's a provision for the amount of force you can use, whether or not it's useful in that particular circumstance. Parents have been taken to court and been found guilty because they used too much force. Yeah, you could. And your parents retroactively can also say, well, I didn't approve of that. You can retroactively withdraw in loco parentis in some situations. So, obviously, we're not going to do it. But technically, which is the best kind of true, Mr. Patel could put you over his knee and spank you. And I find that hilarious. Oh, sorry. So, back to your autism question. And the long answer is we don't really know. The most recent research I read, which comes from just literally 3 days ago, it seems to be correlated with getting a high number of flus in your childhood as well. So flu, like the flu, which is viruses invading your body. That strongly suggests at least some genetic component because that affects gene production. And so the problem with something like any sort of developmental disorder is people can have the same genes, but different things in their environment can affect how they're expressed. And so we've had identical twins. One developed autism and one doesn't. So it's not entirely genetic, but we do know it has a genetic component, and we're not entirely sure as to what it is. Your hand at the back was up.
So legally, Mr. Patel can spank us. Are we allowed to spank him?
No.
I don't really say that.
You're not his parent, but he is legally your parent.
But if he started spanking me, could I fight back?
No. That would be assault. That would be wrong. How dare you?
So every house parent has the right to spank their own the kids in that house.
I wonder in Brentwood history, like in the recent history, if that's ever happened.
No. They paddled children up until the 70s. Like 79, like it was obviously quite late. We were apparently one of the first all boys boarding schools to stop. We were also, I think, the first all boys boarding school to allow girls in. Yeah. Those poor brave souls. We had like 12 girls or something the very first year. Like it was can you imagine being like in an all boys school and then like you're one of 12? I'd be like, hats off to those brave souls.
Also, like, when a child comes out with like a disorder, is it true that also it's like when child doesn't get enough oxygen, so then it's brain kind of messes up.
That can happen. During birth, the umbilical cord can wrap around the neck, and then as it's being born, it can strangle. And if it strangles and blood flow to the brain is stopped, there's the rule of threes. You can go 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water, 3 minutes without oxygen. So if your brain is without oxygen after 3 minutes, parts of it are dying. That is, there's no genetic thing there that's causing it. That's just like if you got in a car accident and your heart wasn't pumping for more than 3 minutes. They just got brain damage due to an accident. Yeah. This is why before certain types of hospitals, because there was a part in our history where going to a hospital actually lowered your life expectancy. You want people who are trained in birth around you at birth because of accidents that can happen. It's almost entirely driven by statistics now. If you do X and Y, the chance of you and the baby surviving are this. And if you do Z and W instead, your chance is this. And you just get to make the choice of which procedure you want to do.
Can you explain this? Like, because I heard like a story.
I explain everything.
This might be true or not true, but like there was like once a king and like he had a son or something like that, and as like a baby, they exposed him to like a very, very tiny bit of poison. And as he grew up, they exposed him to like a little bit more and more. I know this is extremely dangerous, but by the time he was like older, he was like immune to it. So like when people tried to poison him, it didn't work.
Have you ever watched The Princess Bride?
No.
You must watch The Princess Bride. It's now a sign for you. So that's a sign. That aside, very few poisons work that way. That's probably apocryphal. I think I've heard, I don't know where that comes from, but that's ringing some. But the reason they observe that is there are a few poisons where that works for. And you can think of a bit like drug dosing. If you are routinely exposed to a certain amount of heroin, you can take more. But if you gave that to a person who's never had heroin before, they'd overdose.
Yeah.
So there are a few. Arsenic is one of those poisons you can do that with. So there are people who have slowly increased the amount of arsenic in their own food to a certain amount. And then on the particular day, they put it in both plates. And then their spouse dies from arsenic poisoning. And you say, well, I ate it too. And they go, oh, you were just lucky, I guess. And then you get away with murder. So they're rare. So if the legend is that they did that with all poisons, that's almost certainly a legend. Very specific poisons, sometimes that works. Yep.
It like changes your face shape. Like, how does it do that?
With everything taken during fetal development. So this is probably, if some of you ever may find yourself in a position in which there is something in your womb, the reason it's important not to smoke, drink, do drugs, be careful about what medications, is that everything's being built. So I analogize it to, imagine you're building a house and you have a bunch of work people there, contractors are building. And while the house is being built, you throw a mad party. Like tons of alcohol, tons of booze, you hand it out. It's while the workers are working, so they help themselves, and they keep building. They're building while drunk. The party ends, and they keep building normally, but now they just sort of cover everything. But there's walls that are going like this. There's a stairway that goes nowhere that just doesn't even have a door at the end. And then the rest, a lot of the house still works, but there's parts of it that, because it happened while it was being built, that never goes away. Same with fetal. If you drink at the right time or the right day, then you will affect a certain part of development, and that just never gets fixed. And so the certain facial features, and you get those, the more of it that happens, is because a lot of this development is happening in the womb as the face and different areas come together. And brain developments as the parts of the brain are developed, particularly deep in the brain, because that develops first, it just affects that.
What does it do to your brain? Like,
Yeah. If you have just if people who have this condition find themselves, they have more anger management problems. They are less likely to be able to focus. They have what we would characterize as extreme ADHD conditions sometimes. There's been serious proposals by psychologists that suggest a large amount of children who are ADHD are actually just undiagnosed fetal alcohol syndrome. But it's not strongly pushed in the community because there's nothing you can do about it. The treatment's the same either way, and that's just going to make mom upset. What are you going to do about it? We have a friend we went to university with who always liked to drink until they blacked out. Found out afterwards that she was pregnant during that time. She didn't know. She stopped immediately afterwards. Her child has when you look at her child, that is but and problems in school. It now has an IEP, is getting help, all the things needed. But there's no point telling her or having that discussion because there's nothing she can do. It is something to consider, but at the same time, people are free to do what they want. If you stop one half of humanity from ever being able to drink because they might be pregnant, then you'd be stopping one half of humanity from having any rights. So, but yeah, you just need to be careful. And if you are thinking about having children, take a B vitamin. There's one, if you're low in B vitamins, you can get a cleft palate, which requires, this is babies who are born with this, specifically because of one B vitamin, lacking of it during pregnancy. And a B vitamin will take care of that problem and it won't happen. But if you don't have enough, you get so that's why they recommend prenatal vitamins. It's the only time that you're recommended vitamins in your entire life. If you're taking vitamins at any other time, they're probably wasted.
Really? So vitamin D is not good.
Unless you've been told to by a doctor, vitamin D is one of those vitamins. Now, we live in a northern climate, we're not getting a lot of sunlight, and the amount you buy from like the store is so low that who cares? But you're just paying money. But get a test from a doctor and actually find out.
What about omega-3?
So eat it in food.
Yeah, but like, doesn't it like if you don't eat too much fish?
Eat food. Things aren't absorbed in the same way when you take them in a pill. Unless you're like extremely deficient, they have almost every time they do a study, they show like vitamin E is good for your heart. So then you study people who take vitamin E and their heart health doesn't go up. Turns out eating vitamin E in brown bread is good for your heart. Eating vitamin E pills doesn't seem to do anything. They don't know why. It is the vitamin E. So one thing that vitamin pills are really good at is making very expensive pee. It just goes in there, your body freaks out because it's way too much, and then you pee it out. And we don't want to get into situations like that poor girl in Vancouver. She got really sick. So her parents who were giving her vitamins said, when she's getting sick, we better give her more vitamins. She was actually having vitamin E. It was a bad example for the pee because it's actually absorbed by the body and your body doesn't let it go. She had vitamin E toxicity syndrome. And then they started giving her more vitamin E.
Oh, God.
She's fine. Okay, we should probably define these terms. You got me off on several rants. An allele, we already, I think, defined. Didn't I define that somewhere?
No.
Okay. Two or more versions of a gene at a location on a chromosome.
Wait, what are those last? What are those last?
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah, you can.
No, I can't.
These are vicious lies. Yeah. I already did that. There you go. Yeah, I heard that surprised exclamation at the back. And then this one, what is a gene? Blue genes. A gene is a unit. Why are you not printing? A unit of heredity. How do you spell heredity? So I'm going to put this over here so you can read it. Unit of heredity is transferred from parent to spawn. Your spawn. I just like the term. Like frogs have spawn.
How do people have different colored eyes?
You have a gene that produces a pigment that has a particular color. That is a protein encoded on a gene. You get different proteins, you have different eye colors.
That looks really rare.
Is it? Blue is rarer than brown. Mostly because brown protects your eye better. But you live in northern climes. In certain areas, you can get away with lighter and it won't negatively affect you. So mutations will survive.
No, I mean like one brown eye, one blue eye.
Oh, heterochromia. Because you have two genes, you can get regulation that happens in one eye that shuts off one of the genes, and it didn't shut off on the other side. Yeah.
How is like alopecia? Or what's
Like,
no,
no.
not that.
Oh, you're. Albinoism is extremely common because although you can have multiple different genes for eye color, they all call up a lot of the same proteins. You have a gene for making melatonin, for making the pigment, and other genes will call on that. They'll say, express this pigment over there, which is a different gene, and then do this and this and this and this. I meant melanin. Sorry. I was giving out melatonin last night. Yeah, that's the drug or the pill. Melanin. One mutation can break the melanin gene, and then you don't have any melanin at all. So your eyes are pink, your flesh is like translucent, your hair is white, you're an albino. And that happens in multiple species and happens with a fairly regular rate. Like albino elephants were considered highly prized, and the king used them to like punish people. In a second. No, that's an entirely different thing. And that may have to do with melanin expression, I'm not entirely sure. But albinoism is when you're born with no pigment. I don't know how that works. I'd have to look that up.
People who have like that no pigment, does that affect like anything other than just how they look?
Oh yeah, there's corresponding vision problems. You're more likely, of course, to get sunburn and skin cancer. There are some organ problems that you can inherit with that as well, because it does affect some other things as well, but I don't know all the complete details. But it's not just that you have no pigment. There are a few other things that go wrong as well.
Yeah, because I know about like the eye.
Yeah.
First eye.
Yeah. Okay, this is the last page. I'd like to finish it up. We have albinoism right here. So there's a little albino bunny, and I'm not going to write that because doesn't matter. Hopping around. No, I typed albino bunny in Google, and that's what it gave me. I don't actually know what it is because this thing does not look like a bunny. But whatever it is, I don't think we should question what people are. We should just accept them for who they are. Yeah. If you go on to genetics, you do say AP biology, you will probably get fruit flies, and you'll study eye color genetics and actually breed them together. Fruit flies breed extremely rapidly, as you may notice in your kitchen, and you can see what genes they have by what eye colors are produced in different offspring, so they're really easy to do genetic experiments on. Yeah.
11 or 12?
I believe 12, but double check with an AP teacher. I just know because all of a sudden the lab is full of fruit flies that escaped. Genes are read inside what organelle has all the genes? Nucleus. But where are proteins built? Yes?
Aren't they built in the
ribosomes? In ribosomes outside the nucleus. So the process is DNA code.
So we just need to know what's outside of the nucleus.
RNA, we're going to go into that a little bit. But I'm assuming you've done some of this last year with organelles, RNA and ribosomes, outside the nucleus. And then once you get it made, you get it turned into a protein. And from there, you get a trait or a phenotype. When the DNA is all packed up into chromosomes, it can't be read. So usually the DNA is unwound for reading. That's why when you stain a nucleus, it just looks dark. You don't see individual chromosomes. And the process is replication. Life. Unwound.
What's after protein?
Oh, yeah, I'm about to text recognize some things. This is a trait or a phenotype. Oh, it's done the thing. So we'll go to perfect.
Transition or translation?
Transcription.
What?
Oh, these ones. Transcription and translation. No, I haven't finished that. Transcription is DNA to RNA, and translation is RNA to protein. So RNA is the messenger. DNA is like the giant book of rules Mr. Patel has in his office. And then all the photocopies he takes, well, not really photocopies, all the emails that are then written telling you about all the rules, that's the RNA. It's being sent out and disseminated to you. Do we have anything after the hierarchy here? Or just a pretty picture? Just a pretty picture. Now, next day, we're going to do a little bit more of that protein synthesis. So, translation. We're not going to do a lot on this. This is known as the holy dogma of DNA, transcription and translation. Replication is just mitosis. It's DNA to DNA. And I mention that mostly for completeness. So we have me. My hand has a cell. That cell has a nucleus. Inside that nucleus is a chromosome. The chromosome is wound up into little DNAs. It comes out and has that structure. I am going to post a video for you to watch tonight called Protein Synthesis. The link is there. You can also type it in off your notes. And I have a look. Assignment number 10. Do for next slide. In September. Thank you. Bluetooth on. AirDrop is set to everyone. Lydia of Whiterun. It sometimes takes a moment to populate. Oh, that person just went away. Stop.
But still more time than that.
Yeah.
I mean, you could save it to a Google Drive and then send me a download link.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure. Thank
Wonder
you.
if that would work? Okay. Good day, sir. Not too bad.
What's your today in advisory?
I don't know.
You're not.
I don't know. No.
When you OBS